Hello and welcome to another video with Code Rhetoric with Tam Talk. And of course, I am Tam Talk, talking all things coding. And so I wanted to come on and create this video because I had a student who actually posed a question, and I figured, perhaps other individuals who are studying for their coding exam would like to know the answer as well. So here we go. So the question posed was, what is the importance of sequencing and how should we sequence our diagnosis codes or ICD-10-CM codes? So here's what I share with them. So the first one is it's very important to understand medical necessity. You want to make sure that the diagnoses are linked or linked to the services based upon medical necessity. What is medical necessity? For example, you wouldn't go for an open heart surgery if you had a toe fungus. It doesn't make medical sense, right? For someone to work on your heart when your toe is the actual issue. So, yes, so you want to make sure your diagnosis is medically necessary. So if the doctor is performing an open heart surgery, you want to make sure it's something that is related to the heart or cardiovascular circulatory system, right? So again, making sure that is your primary diagnosis for that primary reason. And it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be surgery. It could be an evaluation, whether it's in an office or an outpatient facility evaluation. It could be ancillary services such as labs, radiology, EKGs, things of that nature, ancillary. And then it very well, definitely it better be for surgery, right? So it's very important that you have medical necessity, and you want to make sure that your primary diagnosis establishes medical necessity. And if you haven't watched my other video, but I always share the importance of making your coding make sense. When you're coding, you're simply just telling a story with your coding. You're telling the story of what occurred in the provider or clinician and patient encounter, and you're just translating all of that into codes. It's almost like you're learning a new language, in which you are. Okay, so the next step is, for those of you who are studying coding for the first time, ICD-10-CM, yes, you're going to use the alphabetic index to look up your diagnosis code, right? But don't stop at the alphabetic index. That's just the neighborhood. It's very important that you always go back to your tabular list to confirm what your diagnosis is. In the tabular list, it's going to give you the specifics. It's even going to tell you if there's other digits that are required for that code, right? So in the alphabetic index, it may give you like 3 digits. But if you go to your tabular list, it's going to give you perhaps 7 digits for that code. The tabular list will also confirm or provide further instruction on how to code, whether it's just one code or you need to add multiple codes to that diagnosis in order for it to be coded correctly or to the highest specificity. And also in those instructions, it will tell you what code should be listed first or second or third. So that also plays a part in the sequencing. So again, so we have medical necessity, then we have confirming the instructions via the tabular list. And then third, just reading your ICD-10 coding guidelines. It is chock full of instructions. I call it the rules for playing the coding game when it comes to ICD-10 or your diagnosis coding. So again, medical necessity, tabular list, coding guidelines. And it's very important that you do all of these, especially when you are sitting for your examination, as well as if you're in a live coding session, that you understand the importance of all of these. Again, medical necessity is, again, painting the picture of medical common sense. Why would a doctor perform this surgery? Why would this doctor offer this services or this service or the services for this particular diagnosis? It has to make medical sense. Put yourself, I would say, put yourself in the position of a patient. Would you go and have open heart surgery for a toe fungus? Because again, it doesn't make medical sense, right? So you want to make sure your coding makes medical sense. And then for your ancillary services, again, with your labs, your x-rays, and all the other, like I call it EKG ancillary services, you want to make sure it makes medical sense. So the example that I also use with my student is, okay, let's say the patient comes in for an evaluation, and the patient may have some comorbidities, right? And so in the coding world, Comorbidities are simply like chronic conditions such as hypertension, hyperlipidemia, diabetes, hypercholesterolemia, and that is not the exhaustive list. It's just some of the most common ones that you will see in a live coding environment. So let's say a patient presented to the office or to the provider with a diagnosis or signs and symptoms of fever, right? Well, okay, so the doctor performs the evaluation, examination history, and decides the patient does have fever, but he also notates that the patient have those comorbidities or chronic conditions. The primary diagnosis is going to be fever, right? But he's also or she's also going to list those other conditions as second, third, and fourth, right? But the doctor also orders labs and x-rays, okay? So he may order a CBC for I'm going to say hypertension or hyperlipidemia, right? Okay, so when you go to code for the lab, fever is not going to be the primary diagnosis for the lab, because the reason the doctor is ordering the lab is for perhaps hypertension or hyperlipidemia. So in that case, your primary diagnosis will change, because that is the reason why the doctor is ordering the lab. Okay, now let's say the doctor orders the EKG, and he or she is ordering it because, again, the patient has hypertension. Hypertension, when we think of hypertension, we automatically equate that to something with the heart, right? Or the cardiovascular system. So, again, in that case, your primary diagnosis is going to be hypertension. It's not going to be fever. So let's go back. Fever is the primary diagnosis for the evaluation, the office encounter, but it is not the primary diagnosis for the lab, nor is it the primary diagnosis for the EKG. Okay, so again, it's all about making it make medical sense. So again, you have maybe four or five diagnoses, but you want to make sure that the diagnosis is linked to the appropriate service based on medical necessity. Again, fever for the evaluation, which is the primary. I'm going to say hyperlipidemia for the lab, and then it's going to be hypertension for the EKG. Okay, so there you go with that. And so those services sometimes are ordered ordered as well as performed probably during the same encounter. So it's very important that you pay attention to that. And sometimes, depending on the layout of that particular facility, certain procedures or services may be coded by a different coder. So you may code the office visit, but another coder, and maybe a lab coder, may code the labs, and then I'm going to say someone in cardio may code the EKG. So yes, so those are things that they're going to look for to make sure that the coding makes medical sense. So that's how you determine the sequencing of your diagnosis. And again, it's very, very important that you pay close attention, or definitely read the tabular list, because if you don't review the tabular list, you're not going to be coding to the highest specificity. Not with all codes, but make it a habit to refer to the tabular list in the back of your ICD-10 book, because it is going to give you the further steps or instructions that are needed to code to the highest specificity. You're going to hear that a lot. Is it coded to the highest specificity? You may be like, what is that? Again, in the alphabetic index is just simply getting you into the neighborhood of the code. It may give you 3 digits. But in the tabular list, there may be 7 digits to completely code that diagnosis. And also, it may ask that 1 or 2 more diagnosis codes be added, and the codes have to be assigned in this order or sequence in this order in order for it to be coded to the highest specificity. And it also may be like, well, if the documentation or the provider's encounter, the patient also had X, Y, and Z diagnosis, sometimes it may cancel out a diagnosis code. So again, it is very important to review the tabular list for coding specificity, and definitely review your coding guidelines. Review your coding guidelines. They're broken out by systems. It gives you coding techniques, and I would say strategies, but coding techniques, pretty much the rules on how to play the coding game when it comes to your diagnosis coding. So yeah, so hopefully all these strategies, at least few strategies, help you to gain some insight on how to sequence your ICD-10 or diagnosis code, as well as the importance of medical necessity. So that's all that I have for today. So be sure to view any other videos that I have. Some of them are actually taken from the coding guidelines, and just kind of get yourself prepared and in the mindset of medical necessity. And again, look at coding as storytelling as well as a coding game. So until next time, stay blessed.